Does God often protect the faithful? Even in martyrdom, is our eternity protected? Let's review Acts 27. What happened as Paul began his voyage? How kind was the guard Julius? Now, when it was decided that we would sail for Italy, they proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius, and getting aboard an Adramyttian ship, which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia, we set sail accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. And from there we set sail, and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we'd sailed through the sea, along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us aboard it. And when we'd sailed slowly for a good many days, and with difficulty had arrived off Cnidus, since the wind didn't permit us to go further, we sailed under the shelter of Crete, off Salmone, and with difficulty we sailed past it and came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. After the Day of Atonement and winter weather approached, what did Paul say? When considerable time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous since even the fast was already over, Paul started admonishing them, saying to them, "Men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what was being said by Paul. The harbor was not suitable for wintering, so the majority reached a decision to put out to sea from there, if somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. When a moderate south wind came up, thinking that they'd attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete, closer to shore. Did they ignore Paul's warning? And was their ship caught in a storm? Before very long, a wind of hurricane force, called the nor'easter, swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and couldn't head into the wind, so we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, modern Gavdos, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together, because they were afraid they'd run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis, off North Africa. They lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. Did an angel comfort Paul that, while the ship would be lost, no one would die? But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me, and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, 'Don't be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island.'" How did the shipwreck unfold after sailing the lower Adriatic between Greece and Sicily? About midnight on the 14th night of the storm, As we were being driven across the Sea of Adria, between Greece and Sicily, the sailors sensed land was near. They dropped a weighted line and found that the water was 120 feet deep. But a little later they measured again and found it was only 90 feet deep. At this rate, they were afraid we'd soon be driven against the rocks along the shore. So they threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship and prayed for daylight. Then the sailors tried to abandon the ship. They lowered the lifeboat, as though they were going to put out anchors from the front of the ship. But Paul said to the commanding officer and the soldiers, "You'll all die unless the sailors stay aboard." So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and let it drift away. In faith, did Paul encourage the crew to eat before they ran aground. While the day was coming on, Paul begged them all to take some food, saying, "Today's the 14th day that you wait and continue fasting, having taken nothing. Therefore I beg you to take some food, for this is for your safety, for not a hair will perish from any of your heads." When he'd said this and had taken bread, he gave thanks to God in the presence of all. Then he broke it and began to eat. Then they all cheered up, and they also took food. In all we were 276 souls on the ship. When they'd eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. When it was day, they didn't recognize the land, but they noticed a certain bay with a beach, and they decided to try to drive the ship onto it. Casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea, at the same time untying the rudder ropes. Hoisting up the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But coming to a place where 2 seas met, they ran the vessel aground. The bow struck and remained immovable, but the stern began to break up by the violence of the waves. As the ship began to break up, did everyone survive, as the angel had promised? The soldiers decided to kill the prisoners to keep them from swimming to shore and escaping. However, the centurion wanted to save Paul, so he stopped them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and head for land. He ordered the rest to grab hold of planks or debris from the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. Does God often protect the faithful? Even in martyrdom, is our eternity protected? You decide.